Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. I'm recording this share on Isru Chag of Sukkos. I hope everybody had a wonderful Yom Tov, but not just a wonderful Yom Tov, a wonderful season of Yomim Noraim, of Rosh Hashanah. Well, let's start with Elul. A wonderful Elul together with Slichus and preparing for Yom Adin, and a wonderful Rosh Hashanah of Tefillah, of being Mamlech, the Rabbeinu Shalom, and accepting upon ourselves Oil Mitzvahs and All Malchus Shamayim, and then a wonderful Aseres Yimei Tshuva of introspection and seeing how we can improve ourselves, and then a wonderful Yom Kippur of Tefillah, of Slicha, Mechila, and Kapara, and then finally a wonderful, beautiful, uplifting Sukkos of immersing ourselves in the mitzvahs of Sukkah and the mitzvahs of Daled Minim. It's such a beautiful season. You have a mitzvah daraisa to go into a Sukkah where you completely immerse yourself in the mitzvah of Sukkah. You surround yourself in the Sukkah, in the Anani HaKavod, in the Sila de Memenusa, and then in Shul you take the Daled Minim, the Lulav Keneged the Shedra, the spine, and the Esri Keneged the Lave, and the Hadassim Keneged the Einayim, and the Aravas Keneged the Peh. So you kind of envelop the entire guf, the entire body, in mitzvahs, and then finally we come to Simchas HaTorah, Shmini Atzeres, where the Rabbeinu Shalom asks us to please stay a little bit longer. We don't want the season to end, and then finally we come to Simchas HaTorah, where we're misameach with the Torah HaKadoshah, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim. We thank the Rabbeinu Shalom that He chose us from all of the nations. Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Teirasai. I always speak out. We have to realize that the Torah says that the bracha of Asher Bacha Banu is not a berachas ha-mitzvahs. The bracha of Asher Bacha Banu is a berachas haidah. We're thanking the Rabbeinu Shalom for Maimed Har Sinai. We're thanking the Rabbeinu Shalom for taking us, bringing us to Har Sinai, giving us the Torah HaKadoshah and everything that comes with it, giving us a life, Gehem Chayenu Va'erech Yameinu, giving us a Torah HaKadoshah, and finally at the end of the whole season of tshuva, of slicha, mechila, and kapara, we come on Simchas HaTorah, we're misameach with the Torah HaKadoshah, and now armed with all of that, we're ready to go forward into a new year, and it's beautiful. We're learning Torah HaKadoshah, and it's very interesting. I'm a little bit behind the Dirshu schedule, but I hope to catch up in short order. But we're actually beginning today the halachos of the Daled Minim. Very interesting. So, we're in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Sukkah. Today we're picking up with Hilchos Lulav. We're beginning the halachos of the Daled Minim. We'll be learning today, Mirza Hashem, Tav Kuf Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, a brand new Siman, Siman Taf Reish Mem Hey, Dine Lulav, the halachos of Lulav, Ubay Tes Seifim, and here we have 9 Seifim. This is a little bit complex. It might be one of those shiurim which were more complex to prepare than it is to give over, but let's see how it goes. So, says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Lulav shenifredu olav zeh al zeh. If you have a lulav where the leaves became spread apart, and we'll discuss what that means momentarily. You have a lulav where the leaves became spread apart, however, v'loi nidaldalu, but they have not become separated. That's the word I'm going to use, and we'll have to explain what that means. They became spread apart, however, v'loi nidaldalu, they have not separated, ka'ale hachariyos, like the leaves of mature date palm branches do. Kosher, then the lulav is kosher, afilu loy agadoi, even if you don't take leaves of the lulav, let's say rings, and tie the lulav closed. So the Mechaber is differentiating between two cases over here. The lulav shenifredu, a lulav that became spread apart, the leaves have spread apart. But if you want, you could take a lulav ring and you could tie it and you could draw it closed again. That's the lulav shenifredu. The leaves became spread apart, but you could tie it closed. The Mechaber says that lulav is kosher. Then there's nidaldalu ka'ale hachariyos. He says nifredu is kosher. V'loi nidaldalu ka'ale hachariyos. They didn't become spread apart like a mature date palm where you cannot tie it closed. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah discusses the Metzias here. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Shen nifredu. The Mechaber here, well, actually, before we do that, we have to read the Hakdama of the Mishnah Berurah here. Ksiv b'Torah, it says in the Torah HaKdosha, Ulekachtem lachem, you should take for yourselves by Yom HaRishon, on the first day of Sukkos, pre-Eitz Hadar, the fruit of a beautiful tree, a beautiful fruit, the kapais tamarim, and the branch of a date palm, va'anaf eitz avos, and a branch of eitz avos, which we're going to define as the hadassim, va'arve nachal, and the willows that grow by the stream, which is the aravos. The kiblu chazal, and the chazal have a Mesorah, the pre-eitz hadar, this beautiful fruit, what is it? Zehu esrig, this is what we call an esrig, shetam eitzai uperioi shaveh, because the taste of the fruit and the taste of the wood, and I believe this is a reference to the bark of the tree, they have a similar taste. Now, what does it mean that the esrig, the fruit of the esrig, and the bark of the esrig tree have a similar taste? If you cut open an esrig, you will see that there's very, very little flesh in the interior of the esrig. You have the outer yellow skin, then you have a very, very thick white, I guess it's called a rind. It's kind of like when you peel an orange, right? An orange is a citrus fruit, and an esrig is technically a citrus fruit. They're very similar. There's the outer skin. When you peel an orange, you peel off that outer orange skin. Underneath the orange skin, there's a white rind, and inside that, there's the fruit. By the esrig, the white rind is very, very, very thick. The actual flesh of the fruit is very little, so it's really the rind of the esrig that we refer to as the peri. If you would chew on the rind of the esrig, and you would take the bark of the esrig tree, and you would chew on the soft bark of the esrig tree, they have a similar taste. So, the kiblu chazal, the chazal have a Mesorah, the pre-Eitz Hadar, when the pasuk makes a reference to pre-Eitz Hadar, zehu esrig, this is the esrig, shetam eitzai uperioi shaveh. Uksiv, and the pasuk says in regards to the esrig, Hadar, it has to be beautiful. Sheyeh noeh, it should be pleasant. V'hadar, and beautiful. B'ta'arai, in its appearance. V'gidulai, and in its gidul, in its shape. It has to look like a beautiful fruit. And that's why we're so careful with the esrig. It's so hard to pick out an esrig. And a lot of people have preferences. One person likes a smaller esrig. Another person likes a bigger esrig. One person is makpid more on the gidul of the esrig, on the form of the esrig. Another person wants to see an esrig that has beautiful chiritzim, and the lines are beautiful. As one person wants a gartel, but we're so medactic on the esrig, you want a beautiful esrig. Val derech sheyispar b'siman tafreish memches, and we will describe this in greater detail in Siman tafreish memches when we talk about the details of esrig. Since all of the Daled Minim are mentioned by the Torah HaKdosha in one pasuk, lemeidin zeh mizeh, we learn one out from the other. Valkein, and therefore, kol ha'arba minim, all of the Daled Minim, tzrichim lihiyos na'im u'mehudarim, they all have to be pleasant and beautiful, val derech sheyispar lekaman, in the manner which we will describe as we go forward when we speak about the details of each one of the Daled Minim. So basically, since the pasuk says pre-Eitz Hadar, it should be beautiful by the esrig, and since all of the Daled Minim are mentioned in one pasuk, the Chazal say that the Hadar goes not only on the esrig, it goes on all of the Daled Minim. They all have to be beautiful. Kapais tamarim, when the pasuk makes reference to kapais tamarim, the branches of a date palm, hein anfei ha'ilan shigdelin by tamarim. This is a reference to the branches of the tree on which grow dates, the date palm. Kisha yitzmechu, when the branches first grow, kaidem sheyiskashu ha'olin shalahen, before the branches become hard and stiff, v'yisrachaku lekan ulekan, and they spread out rachik min hashedra, so that they stand far apart from the shedra, from the spine of the branch. Ella, rather, when do you have to pick the lulav branch to use it as a lulav? Kishayeh k'may sharbet, when it's straight like a scepter. V'hu hanikra lulav, this is what we call a lulav. V'anaf eitz avos, when the Torah Kedosha makes reference to a branch of an eitz avos, hu hahadas, this is a reference to the hadasim, sha'olav chayfen es eitzoi, where the leaves of the hadasim cover the branch. We've got the hadas is mishulish. You have 3 leaves growing out from each stem, and they go straight up, and they overlap. On each level, the hadasim overlap the next layer of leaves, so that the entire branch is covered. Upratav, and the details of each one of the Daled Minim, Yispar b'Siman Tafresh Mem Vav. Actually, he means here that the details of the hadasim are discussed in the next Siman in Tafresh Mem Vav. Va'arvei Nachal, and the willow branches, the Aravis, Yispar b'Siman Tafresh Mem Zayin, will be described in Siman Tafresh Mem Zayin. Now, before we go to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph, I'm actually going to pull over a lulav over here. I have to tell you that I love the fact that we're learning the halachos of Daled Minim now. I feel like the Rebbeinu Shalom has given us a special gift. The Rebbeinu Shalom is allowing us, this is Isru Chag. Isru Chag ba'avosim ad karnois hamizbeach. The Rebbeinu Shalom says after Yom Tov, there's an Isru Chag. We had Yom Tov Sukkos, we had Shmini Atzeres, where the Rebbeinu Shalom said stay for one more day. And then this Isru Chag. The Rebbeinu Shalom ties us still to the Chag. So the Rebbeinu Shalom has given us a gift. He's not letting us get out of the season yet. We're going to learn Daled Minim now. So I have a lulav here. Now, when we use a lulav, we get the lulav nice and straight and tight, right? All of these branches are pretty much staying close to the shedra. If you can see it on the camera, the shedra is the thick spine of the lulav at the interior. All the way at the interior of the lulav, we have the shedra, the spine, that continues straight up. All of these leaves now are staying straight, pretty much, tight to the shedra. That's the way the lulav grows when the branch first grows on the date palm tree. When it's young and immature, it grows straight like this. Should you leave the lulav on the tree, what will happen over time is all of these branches are going to slowly spread apart, and when they become fully spread out, after a while, at the point of connection, where they connect down here to the shedra, it becomes hard, and it becomes stiff, and at that point, you could no longer take the leaves and bend them back to the shedra. When the branch is fully matured, it spreads apart, it becomes hard and firm, and you end up with this piece where all the branches are sticking out and you can no longer bring it tight together. So this lulav, the way we use it as a lulav, in essence is an immature branch. Now, the Mechaber told us 2 cases here. The Mechaber told us that the lulav shenifredu, a lulav where the leaves became spread out, that's kosher. And the Mechaber contrasted that to another case. He said, lulav shenifredu olav zeh me'al zeh, a lulav with the leaves spread out, v'loi nedaldalu ka'alei hachariyos, and they did not become separated like mature lulav branches, that's kosher. And we're going to see what I'm going to say now in the Mishnah Berurah Beferish, but I'll just give you a heads up. What the Mechaber means here, if you get a lulav that's a little bit older than the type of lulav that we usually take, so that the leaves have already begun to spread, and the lulav is kind of like this. It's already spreading apart, but it's still soft. So you could take a lulav ring and you could tie it closed. That, the Mechaber says, is kosher. What's a problem? Nedaldalu ka'alei hachariyos. If it's a mature branch, so that the leaves have spread apart and they're already niskasha ke'etz, they're already hard and stiff, and now you cannot take a lulav ring and bend it back. They've grown apart and they've firmed up. They've become hard. You can't pull them back anymore. That is going to be puzzle. Now let's take a look at this in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Aleph. The Mechaber said, lulav shenifredu olav. if the leaves have spread apart. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu kamay anfei hashevet. This is like the leaves of the lulav branch. Sha'imdim perudais. They're already starting to stand apart, but v'yechayl lagdan. But you could take a lulav ring and you could bind it back to the shedra. It's still soft. That's okay. Oiskat beis v'loy nidaldalu ka'alei hachariyos. But they have not separated from the shedra in the manner of a mature lulav branch. Chariyos, alei hachariyos, are mature lulav branches. So it explains the Mishnah Berurah, the teva hachariyos, it's the nature of the mature branches, shenifredu ha'olin, that the leaves spread apart, v'nisrachaku harbe, until they actually stand far apart from the shedra, v'nisrachaku harbe, they spread far apart, uvemakayim chiburan, and at the point where the leaves are attached to the shedra, niskashu ke'etz, they become hard like wood. Ve'ein yechayla la'agdan yachad. And once that happens, once they really spread apart and become hard at the point of connection, you can no longer bind it together to the shedra. This becomes like a wooden branch. You simply can't pull it together anymore. That is already going to be puzzle. Okay, so here's so far what we've seen in the Mechaber is, if the branches begin to spread apart, but it's still soft, so you could take a lulav ring theoretically, and you could tie it closed, that's kosher. If they spread far apart and they're already hard, and now you can no longer pull it back together again, that is puzzle. Now, says the Ramah, Hagah, Umikol Makaim, mitzvah bin hamuvchar. The Ramah says it's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar. If you want to be mekayim the mitzvah properly, mitzvah bin hamuvchar belulav she'ein olav prudais legamri. The Ramah says the mitzvah bin hamuvchar, even though the Mechaber just told you if the leaves have spread apart but they're still soft and you could bind it closed, it's kosher. Says the Ramah, mitzvah bin hamuvchar is what we use. The mitzvah bin hamuvchar is get your lulav when it's nice and closed and the leaves are not spreading. That's the mitzvah bin hamuvchar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Gimel, Prudais. The Ramah said the mitzvah bin hamuvchar is get a lulav she'ein olav prudais legamri, that the leaves are not spread apart at all. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hataz he'ela. The Taz brings down Shema shehechmer harav hamagid lemitzvah bin hamuvchar. If you take a look at the Ramah said that the mitzvah bin hamuvchar is to use the lulav where the leaves are completely closed, and he brought this down from a Magid Mishnah and from a Ran. The Taz says, if you look at the Magid Mishnah, when the Magid Mishnah says that there's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar, that it should be closed, what is the Magid Mishnah referring to? The Magid Mishnah says it's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar that it should be closed. How open is considered open? In other words, the mitzvah bin hamuvchar covers what cases? Is slightly spread apart okay? Is that still considered the mitzvah bin hamuvchar? Or the mitzvah bin hamuvchar is mamish what we use? It has to mamish be closed. That's what the Taz is discussing. And the Taz says, Shema shehechmer rava magid lemitzvah bin hamuvchar. When the Magid Mishnah says that there's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar, that the leaves should be closed, hu dafke heichish kol olav tluyos lamata. That's talking about a case where the leaves have spread apart and they're starting to droop down. Rak she'olin im halulav, but they do go up with the lulav, and I'll show you what this means. In that case, the Magid Mishnah says that's not the mitzvah bin hamuvchar, and therefore there's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar that you should not use such a lulav. You should use a lulav that's fully closed. In other words, what the Taz is saying like this: when the Ramah says that there's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar to use a lulav that's closed, he doesn't mean that the only way you're mekayim the mitzvah bin hamuvchar is with a lulav like this, where it's mamish closed. If the lulav is like this, that's also okay. That's not only it's okay, not only it's kosher, that's also the mitzvah bin hamuvchar. If it's like this, it's still the mitzvah bin hamuvchar. When the Ramah says that there's a mitzvah bin hamuvchar, what he means is like this. let's say you have leaves that are, let me take a good leaf here for an example. Okay, we're going to use the example of this. You hold these down. Okay, you see this leaf that's standing away from the lulav? This leaf is leaving the shedra and it's going straight up. Now, it's away from the shedra, but the Taz says this would still be the mitzvah min hamuvchar, according to the Ramah, because even though it's standing away from the shedra, it goes straight up. When does the Ramah say that you're not being mekayim the mitzvah min hamuvchar? That's if you have a branch like this that goes up with the shedra, but then it bends down. So it goes up, and then it goes down. That, the Taz says, is not the mitzvah min hamuvchar. Because now, where the leaf is going down, that's already considered too much separated from the lulav. It's not going in the same direction as the lulav. It's going down. That's already too separated. And if you want to be mekayim the mitzvah min hamuvchar, you got to stand it up and, I guess, tie it closed. But that you shouldn't use. That's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. But this would be mitzvah min hamuvchar. So you can have all the leaves standing apart like this, but they're all going straight up. That's mitzvah min hamuvchar. That's what the Taz brings down. That's how the Taz understands this Ramah. Don't think that the Ramah means that if your lulav is like this, with all the leaves spreading out, that's not mitzvah min hamuvchar, and in order to be mekayim the mitzvah min hamuvchar, you have to have this. Says the Taz, no. The Ramah's problem is if leaves go up with the shedra, but then they bend down, that's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. Now, because the Mishnah Berurah said this, he puts in the following brackets. We're going to see in the next sif that we're learning now about a lulav shenifredu olav. We're learning now about a lulav where the leaves have become spread apart. In the next sif, we're going to learn about a lulav shenifritzu olav. A lulav where the leaves have really become split from the lulav. And that is going to be puzzle. Now, since the Mishnah Berurah just mentioned a case where the leaves seem to be pretty separated from the lulav, it's going up and then bending down, and we're saying, the Taz is saying that according to the Ramah, that's kosher, but it's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. So now the Mishnah Berurah wants to say right away, well, if that's kosher and it's not mitzvah min hamuvchar, then what's the lulav shenifritzu olav that's puzzle? So the Mishnah Berurah sticks in over here, and we'll understand this better as we go forward. He sticks in v'nifritzu olav shepasul, the case of a lulav shenifritzu olav that's puzzle, hu kigoyin shenitlishu olav legamri min alulav. That's talking about a case where a leaf became totally separate, not one leaf, where most of the leaves became totally separated from the lulav, or a lulav shetluyoy slamata, where the leaves are hanging down, v'gam ein oilin im alulav, so that they never go up with the lulav. What that would mean is like this. The Taz is saying that the Ramah is talking about a leaf that goes up with the lulav, and then it droops down. That's not the mitzvah min hamuvchar. Nifritzu olav, that's puzzle, is either the leaves broke off from the lulav and you just tied them on, or it's talking about a case where the leaf doesn't go up and then down. The leaf goes straight down. It's just all the leaves, or roiv of the leaves, are just hanging down so that they don't go up in the direction of the shedra at all. They're like this. That is the lulav shenifritzu olav, that's puzzle. The lulav shenifredu olav, that the Ramah says is kosher but is not mitzvah min hamuvchar, is this. This, says the Taz, where they go straight up and they don't go down at all, and just they're spread apart, but they're soft and you could tie it closed. That, the Taz says, according to the Ramah, is still the mitzvah min hamuvchar. You don't need this to be the mitzvah min hamuvchar, says the Taz, according to the Ramah. This is also mitzvah min hamuvchar. Okay, now, Continues in the brackets over here, the Chavetz Chaim, he says, Nifrit to olive that's puzzle is either Nishlishu olive legarmi min alulav, the leaves separated completely, or the leaves are going straight down. The gam ein oilin alulav, they never go up with the lulav. Or a third case, shenidaldalu mimakim cheburan bashedra, if you have the leaves have become mostly detached. So you have like this. I'm not going to break it off all the way. It became mostly detached, but it's still somewhat attached. That case, even if it's pointing up, or they're hanging off from their point of contact with the shedra, but they're still a little bit attached. Those are puzzle. But if the leaves are not hanging down at all, just they're a little bit going, pointing out, they're a little bit spread apart, you don't have to improve upon that lulav at all. That's what he means here. He doesn't mean that isn't mitzvah min hamuvchar. That is mitzvah min hamuvchar. What he means is, if the leaves are not hanging down, they're just a little bit spread, afilu mitzvah min hamuvchar ein kan. There's no improvement necessary to make it mitzvah min hamuvchar. That is mitzvah min hamuvchar. That's the way the Taz understands this Ramah. However, but my Mordechai, if you take a look at the Maimon Mordechai, the Chain Bibikura Yaakov, and also the Sefer Bikura Yaakov, Mefakvikin al Divrei Taz, they disagree with the Taz. V'daitam, and it's their opinion, Kistima Saramah, for a simple understanding of the words of the Ramah, the mitzvah min hamuvchar, that for the mitzvah min hamuvchar, yesh lizar, we should take care, shaloi litai lechatchila lulav, that lechatchila you should not use a lulav, ela in kein sheichven alav zeh al zeh, only if the leaves are laying one upon the other on the shedra, v'loy litztadin, and they are not going out to the sides at all. So again, excuse me, let us summarize what we've seen over here in Sif Aleph. In Sif Aleph, the Mechaber told us that there's a lulav shenifredu olav zeme al zeh. There's a lulav where the leaves have become spread, and that is kosher. And the way the Mishnah Berurah explained this to me is, he said the leaves have spread apart, right? I don't know why I'm having such a hard time doing it here. Okay, the leaves have become spread apart, but they're pointing up, and they're still soft, and I could take a lulav ring, and I could tie it closed. That, the Mechaber says, is kosher. But if they spread apart, and they became mature, so that they're kosher ke'etz, now they're hard, and you can no longer bind it closed, let's say with a lulav ring, that the Mechaber said is puzzle. We have a Ramah. The Ramah says, mitzvah min hamuvchar, the lulav should be closed. Now we have this machlokes achrayim over here, the Taz, the Maimon Mordechai, and the Bikura Yaakov. What is the mitzvah min hamuvchar that the Ramah is looking for? The Maimon Mordechai, the Bikura Yaakov, they understand the Ramah very simply. The mitzvah min hamuvchar is what we use, a closed lulav. That's the mitzvah min hamuvchar. The Taz says no. Even this is mitzvah min hamuvchar, according to the Ramah. What the Ramah does not want to see is the Ramah does not want to see a lulav where the leaf goes up in the direction of the shedra and then droops down. That's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. Now, just interesting. Why is it that a lulav where the leaves are spreading apart, but it's still soft so that you could bind it together, why is that kosher? I'm a little surprised, actually, that the Mishnah Berurah doesn't bring it down yet. Maybe he'll bring it down later. The reason that's kosher is because what is the lulav called? We learned in the Hakdama over here of the Mishnah Berurah, the lulav is the kapos tamarim. The kapos tamarim, the branch of the date palm tree. The word kapos can be vowelized so that it should be read kafus. Kafus means bound. And we learn out from there that even if the lulav is only closed, if you bind it, if you tie it closed, that's okay. And like the Achrayim say, maybe the Rishonim, This is similar to what we learn in Kodshim, Kol Sheroi Lebila Ein Bila Ma'akeves. Let's say we have a carbon mincha, and we have to mix the oil and the flour. If the proportions are proper, so that it could be mixed, then even if you didn't mix it, it's still kosher. Kosher roy lebila, as long as it can be mixed, ein bila ma'akeves. The mixing is not ma'akev. So too by the lulav. Even though the leaves are spread, if it's roy lekafus, if you could bind it, ein kafus ma'akeves. You don't have to bind it in order for it to be kosher, but it has to be able to be bound closed. So, if it's still soft and you could bind it closed, then it's kosher even if you don't bind it closed. But if the branch has already matured so that the leaves are spread out and now they're kosher ke'etz, and you could not bind it even if you wanted to, if you tried to force it together they would crack off, that's puzzle. Now, also, how do we know that you don't have to bind it closed? Maybe you do have to bind it closed? No, because the word is not vowelized kafus. The word is vowelized kapois. So you don't have to bind it. But from the fact that the word could be vowelized kafus, we learn out that kafus is enough. If you would be able to bind it, that's kosher. Okay, now let's go on to Sif Beis. Wow, I can't believe it's already 31 minutes into the shir. Okay. Siv Beis. Now we go to the next case, which now we're going to have a psul. Nifredu olav. If the leaves have spread, that's kosher. But now Siv Beis, nifritzu olav. If the leaves have become split off. Let's remember in the context of Hilchas Sukkah or Erevin, a pirza is a breach. So nifritzu is worse than nifredu. Nifredu is spread. Nifritzu is a split. The leaves have become split off. What does that mean? So says the Mechaber, V'hu, the translation of that is, sheyidaldalu mishidroi, they've become separated from the shedra, mishidroi shalulav, they've become separated from the spine of the lulav, ka'ale achariyos, like the mature date palm trees. Now, I want to stop here for a second. If we go with the taich that we learned from the Mishnah Berurah in Ice Cotton Base, in Sif Aleph, the Mechaber said, nifredu, spread apart is kosher, v'loy nedaldalu ka'ale achariyos. As long as they did not spread apart, as long as they did not become split off like the mature date palm trees. And the Mishnah Berurah told me in Ice Cotton Bays that means the mature date palm trees, they spread apart, they become kosher ke'etz, they become hard like wood, and you can't bind it together. They didn't break off. They became all the way spread apart, and they became kosher ke'etz. That's what the Mishnah Berurah told me, that in Sif Aleph, that's what v'loy nedaldalu ka'ale achariyos means. Now in Sif Beis, the Mechaber says, nifritzu olav is puzzle. What's nifritzu olav? V'hu, what does that mean? Sheyadaldalu mishidroi shalulav ka'ale achariyos. They did fully spread apart and become kosher ke'etz like mature date palm branches. And now you cannot pull it closed. So they're still attached. The leaves are still attached, but they grew apart fully and they became kosher ke'etz. And now you cannot bind it closed anymore. That, the Mechaber says, is possible. Now, there's no Mishnah Berurah on this phrase over here. So now, with that understanding, let's go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, Dahainu, that is, i.e., that is, so the Mechaber just said, Nifritzu olav is puzzle. What's Nifritzu olav? V'hu sheyadaldalu mishidroi shalulav ka'ale achariyos. They've gone all the way apart like mature date palm trees, which the Mishnah Berurah told me means that they're still attached, but they grew apart and they're kosher ke'etz, so you can't close it. Now says the Ramah, Dahainu, and the Ramah is going to have a different translation. But the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell me that this Dahainu is not actually defining what the Mechaber just said. The definition of what the Mechaber just said is what I told you. That the leaves spread apart, they're still attached, and they became kosher k'etz so that you cannot close it. That's puzzle. Now the Ramah wants to add in another case that's also puzzle. So this Dahainu is not that is. It's not a definition. It's not i.e. He's adding another case. Dahainu, she'enon oilim im hashedra, if you have the leaves of the lulav are not going upwards in line with the shedra, rather, instead, says the Ramah, elatluyin lamata, rather they're hanging down. That, the Ramah says, is puzzle. That's puzzle. So, the way we just defined the Mechaber and the Ramah, which is the way the Mishnah Berurah defines it, is we have two cases over here so far in Sif Beis. Case number one is the Mechaber's case. Nifritzu Allah v'hushi yidaldalai mishidrei shalulav kalei achariyos. If the leaves of the lulav have spread apart, they still may be going up, but they spread apart far from the shedra, and they're niskasha ke'etz, they became hard like wood, so you can no longer bind it closed. That's puzzle. Next case is the Ramah's case. Tahainu she'enam oilim em hashedra elutluyin lamata. Or if roiv of the leaves no longer go up in the direction of the shedra, instead they're hanging down. Puzzle, that's puzzle. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cut and Daled. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Dahainu, Ritzaynai Loimar. When the Ramah says Dahainu, what he actually wants to say is, Degam Zeh, also this case that I'm about to give you, Hu B'chlal Nedaldalu Me'arech HaShedra, that is also considered a case of Nedaldalu Me'arech HaShedra, of leaves that have become separated from the length of the spine. Because the length of the spine goes straight up. A leaf that hangs down and does not go up with the shedra is nidaldalu. It's separated from the shedra, even though it's actually still connected to the shedra, but it no longer is associated with the shedra. The shedra goes up. This leaf goes down. That is also considered nidaldalu me'arech hashedra, and that is also puzzle. Even though it has not become disconnected at the point of growth from the shedra. V'hu adin, and the same halacha would apply. Im nekru mimakam chiburan b'shedra, if the leaves are breaking off from the shedra, v'adayin mu'urin b'miktsas, but they're still a little bit attached. Av she'ein tluyis lamata, even if they're not hanging down. If roiv of the branches somehow have become mostly disconnected from the shedra, but they're still a little bit attached, and they're not hanging down, they're going up. That's also puzzle. That's also considered nidaldalu. The ima shedra ba'atzpa nishbara, that I'm not going to show you on the lulav, because I still need the lulav to use as an example. If the shedra itself is broken, v'ma shedra ba'atzpa nishbara, if the shedra itself is broken, u'tluya lamata, and now it's hanging down. So let's imagine that this was the shedra, and the shedra itself broke, and now the top of the shedra is hanging. It's hanging down. V'hainu shem'ura b'miktsas, but it didn't mamish break off. It's not that the top of the shedra actually broke off the lulav. The shedra is partially broken off of the lulav, and it's hanging down. Nirali the kosher. Now the Mishnah Berurah actually over here is quoting a Magen Avram. This Nirali is not the Chavetz Chaim talking, it's the Ramah, the Magen Avram. Nirali the kosher. The Magen Avram is going to say he thinks that would be kosher. Why? The dafka beroiv olin puzzle. Because all of these psulim that we're talking about, we're going to see, only apply when this is the case with the majority of the leaves. The dami lebehema shenishbaru roiv tzaliseh treifa. This is similar, very interesting comparison, a behema. You shechted an animal, and you find that most of its ribs are broken. An animal where most of the ribs are broken is considered a treifa. But the nishbara the dami lebehema shenishbaru roiv tzaliseh treifa. An animal where most of the ribs are broken is a treifa. The nishbara shedra kshera. But if most of the ribs are intact and the shedra, the spine of the animal broke, then guess what? It's not considered a treifa. So, what's the Magen Avram saying? If you have a lulav where the leaves are all proper, but the shedra itself snapped, but it's still somewhat connected, and it's drooping down, the Magen Avraham says, I think that's kosher. Why? Because all of these psulim that we're talking about in the lulav, if the leaves are hanging down, if the leaves are too spread apart, if then there's kasha ke'etz, all of those psulim only apply when we're talking about the majority of the leaves. Well, we have a comparison to an animal. An animal where most of the ribs are broken, that's a treifa. But if the ribs are intact and the shedra is broken, it's not a treifa. So too, over here by the lulav. Achein, however, says the Magen Avraham, yesh la'agdoi sham, you should bind the shedra straight, shelo yipal lamata, so that it should not actually physically droop down, because if it does physically droop down, then you're not holding the lulav derech giduloi, the way it grows. And we're going to see later, you have to hold the lulav derech giduloi. Kain kasav Magen Avraham. So says the Magen Avraham. Aval, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, harbe achronim cholken al zeh. Many achronim disagree with this Magen Avraham, and they say that this comparison to the behema is not a valid comparison. The shani asam, by the behema it's different, because when we talk about an animal where roiv of the ribs are okay and just the spine is broken, many of you are probably wondering, how could an animal with a broken spine not be considered a treifa? The answer is, the shani hasam, the chut hashedra, kayim. We're talking about a case over there where the actual spinal cord, which is inside the spine, is okay. It's just the outside sheath. It's the spinal column itself that's broken. That's why it's not a treifa. So the animal that's not a treifa is the animal where roiv of the ribs are intact and the spinal cord is intact, and it's only the spinal column that's broken. Dem nifsak achut, if the spinal cord is broken, avsha shedra kayim, even if the cord would be broken, but the spine itself would be intact, treifa, the animal is definitely a treifa. Masha'ein kein be'inyonenu. Over here, that's not a valid comparison. Over here, there is no spinal cord, spinal column. If the spine is compromised, the lulav should be puzzled. When the Magen Avraham talks about a lulav where the shedra is broken and it's hanging down, he doesn't mean that the shedra is mamish broken. That would definitely be puzzle. That would be considered like a lulav where the top is chopped off. What the Magen Avraham wants to say is mismoitet lamata. It's not broken, it's just malformed and it's drooping down. That's why the Magen Avraham makes the comparison to an animal where the shedra is broken, meaning it's compromised, but the spinal cord is not broken. So it's a compromised spine, but it's not a broken spine. So too by the lulav, it's malformed and it's going down, so it's a compromised spine, but not a broken spine. Okay. Now let's go weiter in Sif Beis in the Ramah. So far in Sif Beis, again, just to sum up, we learned about two cases. We had the case of the Mechaber. The case of the Mechaber is Nifritzu Olav. The leaves have spread out. They've matured. They're kosher ke'etz. They're hard. You cannot bind it closed anymore. That lulav is puzzle. The case of the Ramah is the leaves have spread out to the point where the leaves don't go up with the lulav anymore. They hang down. If most of the leaves of the lulav are spreading apart from the shedra and hanging down, that is puzzle. Then we had some peripheral cases over here in the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Daled. Now let's go weiter in the Ramah, 5 lines from the bottom, middle of the line. Hagah. The chol shekain, certainly, im nifritzu, if the leaves have mamish become split, the nekru lamata min hashedra, so that they are physically separated from the shedra, and just you're tying them back on, the puzzle afilu agdan. That's puzzle even if you tie them back on. Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Hey. The nekru lamata, Ritzay Lamar, what the Ramah wants to say is, lamata b'makom chibor ha'olin lashedra, nekru sham min hashedra. If down below, at the point of connection to the shedra, the leaves have physically broken off so that they're no longer connected to the shedra, Ve'ena mechubarim, and they're not attached at all. Ela yidei aguda, just you're taking and you're tying it together. Then he's cut vav the puzzle. That lulav is puzzle. I feel ogdon even if you bound it closed. V'hu adin, and this is a very important Mishnah Berurah here. V'hu adin b'masha kasav hagala maila. The same halacha is true, just like we just said. If the leaves are physically detached, but you tied them on, the lulav is puzzle, so too that same halacha applies, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hu adin b'masha kasav hagala maila, in the Ramah's earlier case, shepsulim kishein tluyos lamata, the case where the Ramah said that if the leaves are hanging down, the lulav is puzzle. The lulav is puzzle, says the Mishnah Berurah, gam kein puzzle afilo ogdan. Even, let's say the leaves are still soft. Roiv of the leaves of the lulav are hanging down. They're not going up with the shedra at all. The Ramah said that's puzzle. Well, how about if it's still soft and I could pull them all together and tie them closed? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, that would be puzzle. Gam kein puzzle afilo ogdan. V'chein kasav hagraz. Okay. Now 3 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch in the words of the Ramah in the middle. Another case. V'chein similarly. Im niskashu ha'olon ke'etz. If the leaves have spread apart, the branch has matured, and now it's hard like wood. Ve'ein yichayla lechabram el hashedra. And you can't tie it closed to the shedra. Puzzle. It's puzzle. Now, this is a fascinating line of Ramah, because I told you that this is the first case of the Mechaber in Sif Beis. The Mechaber started Sif Beis by saying, Nifritzu olav, if the leaves spread apart, V'hu, and that means, Sheyidaldalu mishidrei shalulav kaleach hariyos, that they spread apart from the shedra like the mature date palm trees, which we know from the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Beis and Sif Aleph means that the leaves spread apart, they became kacha ke'etz, they became hard like wood, and you could no longer bind it closed. That the Mechaber says is puzzle. And now the Ramah tells me that exact case. V'cheinim niskashu ha'olim ke'etz, if the branches became hard like wood, ve'ein yichaylu lechabram el hashedra, so that you can no longer bind it closed, puzzle, it's puzzle. Why is the Ramah telling me the same exact case as the Mechaber? And again, I know that that's the case of the Mechaber from the Mishnah Berurah and Ois Cotton Beis. So this bothers me, but in the parentheses it says here, Tur ubeis Yosef. This is spelled out by the Torah. And it's spelled out, and the Beis Yosef on the Torah explains that that's what the Torah means. And let's remember, who's the Beis Yosef? The Mechaber. The only thing I could think is that the Ramah is coming over here just to be mefarish the Mechaber. Let's remember, how do I know what the Mechaber meant when the Mechaber said in Sif Aleph, V'loi nidaldalu ka'alei achariyos? I know it from Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Beis. How do I know what in Sif Beis, V'hu sheyidaldalu mishidrei shalulav ka'alei achariyos means? I only know it from the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Sif Beis. So maybe this Ramah is coming to be mefarish. He's not coming to be cholik on the Ramah. He's coming to be mefarish the Ramah. V'cheinim niskashu ha'olim ke'etz. If it became hard like wood, ve'ein yichaylu lechabram el hashedra, so that you can't bind it close to the shedra anymore, puzzle, he's being mefarish the Mechaber. And that's why they quote over here the Beis Yosef. V'chol zeh b'roiv alin, all of these psulim that we're talking about, these lovim are only possible if it applies to the majority of the branches. Aval miut alin nasu kach. If you have a few leaves that are hanging down, if you have a few leaves that are spread out and become niskasha ke'etz, hard like wood, and you can't close it back, usha'ar alin nisharu, but the rest of the leaves are still okay, va'adayin alulav nishar mechusa ba'alin, and the shedra is still covered with leaves, kosher, then it's kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Zayin, niskashu ha'olin ke'etz, if the branches became hard like wood, and you can't close it anymore, it's puzzle. If the leaves have started to become hard, but they're not yet hard like wood, that's what the Gemara refers to as being similar to a mature branch. The kosher, and that's still kosher even if you don't tie it closed. However, Teva ilan, it's the nature of the tree. Shebeshasha olin ischilu lehiskashos. Once it starts to get hard, nasu alein mufurados, the branches are spread very far apart. Ukfar nispar le'el, and we already saw earlier in the Ramah, in the Maimon Mordechai and the Birkei Yosef, in the Bekurei Yaakov, in the simple understanding of the Ramah, the mitzvah min hamuvkar shelo yimu furados, that the mitzvah min hamuvkar is that they should not be spread apart. So the Mishnah Berurah is saying, mitzvah min hamuvkar, don't use such a lulav. All of these psulim are only when they apply beroiv olin to the majority of the leaves. Beroiv kol ola ve'ola, and to the majority of each leaf. And since each one of those leaves no longer counts, it's like the lulav doesn't have leaves. This also only applies if we're talking about the 4 tfakim. We're going to see that for a lulav we need at least 4 tfakim. So if you have, let's say, a very long lulav, and it's only at the bottom of the lulav that you have these problems, and you could cut that part of the lulav off, and you would still have 4 tfakim of a kosher lulav, then you don't have a problem. If most of the branches of the lulav are broken off, but it's at the bottom of the lulav where you don't even need it, and you still have roiv of the minimum measurement of a lulav, Ice cut and test va'adayin halulav, if the lulav is still covered with leaves, the balav hachi, if the lulav is not covered with leaves, afilu bibiyutan shala olin shenaksar puzzle. We said that all of these psulim only apply if you have that problem with roiv of the leaves. But let's say it's not roiv of the leaves. Let's say it's a miut of the leaves. But by taking off those miut of the leaves, the shedra is no longer covered with leaves, then you have a problem. Then the balavaki afilu b'miyutan shelo olin shenachsar puzzle. Ois cut yud nishar mechusa b'ilan ayin b'bir halacha. He references us to an interesting bir halacha on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph that we don't have time to do today. Bir halacha dibra maskel v'adayin alulav nishar mechusa ba'olin. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should send Yeshua Sefuros Panas and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zoichet to see the B'yis called Tzedek Me'er V'Yameinu. Mirtz Hashem come Pesach. We should be zoichet to be oil regel, and it's so nice to be continuing the theme of Sukkot Daled Minim together with you. Be well.